My name is Mario Patanzi, and as you might notice, with me, not as always, is Bri Maestas, the queen of LTB. Bri, quick question for you. What do Cody Barton and Deshaun Watson's Achilles both have in common?
Oh,
They
I'm
both
worried.
snapped. They both snapped, and a lot of people were really psyched about it. This is altitude adjustment.
Hey, feel I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose till I hiccup. I hit the stage and leave with money that's a stick up.
An inauspicious start for yours truly, as always. Bri, thank you so much for joining me. I imagine that it's got to be a treat for you after putting up with Zach Seegers and Joey Richards to finally join a true professional.
Yeah, this is what we call the bad, good, bad sandwich. You got to wedge something there in the middle to make it tolerable. So Monday was the trio. Today is altitude adjustment. Tomorrow's the trio again. So you set me up for success here.
That's all I ever try to do for you. Yeah, it's nice, right in the middle. That's the meat, and clearly anybody familiar with LTB knows that I am the meat of LTB. And I guess you would be
Meathead of
maybe the
LTV.
glass of wine. Do you know what's weird about that? People will call me a meathead as if it's like a dig at me. Like if you get called a meathead and you consider it anything but a compliment, I just I don't mess with you. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, they could call you a dilly bar, and then that would be very disrespectful.
No, yeah, no, people can't call you Dilly Bar. If you're getting called a Dilly Bar, then you probably deserve it, though. Let's get right into it, Bri. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Like, I wanted to make you just go off the cuff, but I know how that makes you feel. So we did prep a little bit. You're welcome. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to go off the cuff eventually, because that's just kind of what I do. But the first thing that I wanted to discuss, especially with like the next 3 game stretch coming up, this is arguably, probably not even arguably, the most important 3 game stretch for this Denver Broncos team under Sean Payton. And the reason I say that is because first you have a game that you absolutely need to win against the Panthers. Just like the game against the Saints last Thursday, it was a game that on paper they should have won by a lot, and they did. And I feel like that's the first time that we've seen a Broncos team really since the Super Bowl year match up with a team that they needed to dominate really from pillar to post, and they actually did it. Like, it wasn't a close game. It really wasn't close at any point. They dominated them on both sides of the ball and the special teams aspect of it, everything. It was damn near a perfect game for the Broncos. So you have to handle the Panthers a similar type of way. Arguably the worst defense in the NFL. They're an absolute mess. They're an abject disaster. Only a team as piss poor as the Raiders would lose to a team like the Panthers, right? So assuming that you handle business on Sunday, you have what is absolutely the toughest 2 game stretch throughout the entire course of the season. You're at Baltimore, who is playing like the best team in the NFL right now, and you're at Kansas City, where obviously the Broncos have not won since 2015. Shout out Brandon Marshall and Bradley Roby. So the reason that I think, Bri, that these next 3 games are so important is it's really going to be a measuring stick for how competitive this team really can be and how good they actually are. They've won games that they're supposed to win. They had an upset victory against Tampa Bay, but then they've also lost the game that I would say they were supposed to win in the Chargers. We can get into that a little bit later, but depending on how those 2 games go back to back on the road against, probably the 2 best teams in the AFC, if they win even one of those, Bri, I don't think it's that far of a stretch to consider the Broncos like a feasible playoff team.
Yeah. Did you ask a question, or did you just stop
Oh no, I
talking?
was just kind of setting you up, like what are
Oh,
your yeah, that's on me. I'm sorry. I'm a little frazzled right now. Everything that I
same.
said, what do you think, Bri?
No, it's okay. I'm not. You all are aware. The LTB loyal community is all aware. I'm usually in the other seat, so I'm anticipating a question being thrown my direction. But Mario's good with it. We're gonna get through this. Mario, the AFC is looking a lot weaker than we initially anticipated. And there's some teams that are presently on the Broncos schedule where karmatic and universal events are sort of taking over and creating this justification that the Broncos are able to win these games. This start for the Broncos at 4-3 wasn't highly anticipated. And I know there's a lot of Denver Bronco for life fans who 17-0 until they ain't, which is great, but I thought it was going to be a little bit of a slower start. Now, when you're looking at the Seahawks and the Pittsburgh Steelers game, those look like they should have been winnable games entirely. The record should actually be a little bit better had they had their feet underneath them a little bit. It's been disjointed for the Denver Broncos. There hasn't been a whole lot in sync. And I think a lot of that has to do with the offense trying to catch some fire and some momentum. And so as I look at this schedule, there's a couple of games where I wish they would have gone in a different direction, but I don't see a team on here other than the ones you noted, the Chiefs and the Ravens, that scare me naturally. Like, you don't play the Lions, who I'm going to argue back are the most talented and impressive team out there presently. But the Ravens,
Agreed.
I just watched them. I just watched Lamar Jackson absolutely take revenge on any and all sorts, playing the best football of his life off of those MVP bids. So the Ravens game, it scares me, but the Broncos have had convincing wins, and you noted it to start. There isn't a finger pointing where you say, well, the ball bounced luckily, and they kind of got away with that. Those are some of the losses that I see on the schedule. So I think it's a little too early for us to start feeling a little too overly confident, because I still feel like there's not a spark on this offense, and there's not really anything that's going to lead to the extra points. The Broncos scoring, what was it, 33 against the Saints was kind of shocking, and they did it in a way against the Saints team that was pretty annihilated and decimated due to injuries. So, but you it enough and think that there's not going to be more momentum as Bo Nix continues to develop. So I'm uneasy, and you can tell it in the way that I've approached this, because I don't feel confident, but I think a lot of that is trepidation on not necessarily where this team is going, just the reverberations from the past. I feel like there's still that, like, oh, they had a run last season. That didn't end so swimmingly, but the circumstances are different. And it's very important that we continually point that out. The quarterback is different. The way this roster is constructed is different. And in Sean Payton's second season. So to wrap that up in a neat little bow, I'm not sure exactly how I'm feeling, but we're gonna continue to take this game by game. Sunday's approaching fast.
We're gonna call it like cautious optimism, right? And I'm with you. We've seen so many times in the past that the team just loses games when they most need the win. They lose games that they're supposed to win, and you're just not in a good spot. So it's like, because we've been burned time and time again over the last decade, I think it's natural for this fan base to feel a little bit trepidatious, right? And I think that, there are two factors that are really contributing more than anything to the current success of this team. You flash back to last year, terrible start. We all know what happened in Miami, what happened in those first several weeks. The defense was disjointed. They were missing tackles. They looked uninspired. And then randomly, or seemingly randomly, throughout the middle of the season, they caught fire, and all of a sudden they started playing like a top 3 defense in the NFL, and that's carried over to this year. And I've said it on the podcast with Pat, and now I'm going to reiterate it here. What I was told by a bunch of the defensive players is, once they hit their stride last season, it was because Vance Joseph was able to be Vance Joseph. When he took over as the defensive coordinator last year, there were still a lot of pieces of the Vic Fangio defense in place, and the powers that be wanted him to marry those two concepts. They said, be Vance Joseph, but also be Vic Fangio. And anybody that's played any amount of football where your concepts don't really track, and you're not on the same page, like the defenders aren't on the same page, it's why we saw, basically what we saw in Miami in those first few games, where the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. And then the point of the season where the defense stepped it up was because Vance Joseph was able to be Vance Joseph. And so now we've seen that throughout the course of, 7 games so far this season. And it's like, damn, this is a top 3 defense in the league, and it's a reason that they're winning a lot of these games. And I would argue, like, as I said, I would harken back to that Chargers game. I fully believe that if they have Pat Surtain, they don't lose that game. And it's not just what he brings. Like, obviously, he's the best cornerback in the league. You're not only losing his skill set, Bri, when he goes down, you lose that energy, you lose that fire. I don't know if you were at the game, but just watching it on TV, the air was completely taken out of the defense. They were making silly mistakes. There was no gap integrity on the line. They were missing tackles, poor angles. It was like it was things we hadn't seen all season. And then, hopefully won't see since. So when you lose a guy like Pat Surtain, not only does that affect, you go from Pat Surtain to Levi Wallace, and nothing against Levi, but he's not Pat Surtain. It's a pretty steep drop off. But then it shifts the defense's focus, because when Pat Surtain is in there, you put him on an island, you can go man. And when you go man, then Vance Joseph is able to dial up these insane exotic blitzes. The game plan changes, and all of a sudden, guys go from reacting to overthinking. And when defenders are overthinking, they're not flying around the ball making plays like we saw last Thursday. And I think that's the biggest piece. It's like, if they had prepared for not having a Pat Surtain the way that they were able to do with New Orleans, it's still going to look pretty good. So I think that was the biggest aspect. Like, of course, on top of losing a talent like Pat Surtain, it changed their direction. So as long as everything can stay steady, then this defense is going to continue to be one of the best in the league. And the other aspect that I want to discuss is Bo Nix. I know he's left a lot of throws out there. I know that his footwork hasn't been great a lot of the times. He gets a little bit frantic in the pocket. But Bri, this is a guy who's made 7 starts in the NFL. Like, we know the college accolades, that's all well and good. This is the NFL. This is a completely different beast. And I think the encouraging thing is you're seeing progress week to week, like little things. And what makes me really excited, and like maybe is getting me too excited for this team right now, is that they're winning games and they are looking like not just a competent football team, but a competitive football team, despite the fact that Bo Nix isn't quite where he needs to be. But he's continuing to progress. He's continuing to get better. And as long as he stays on that trajectory and he continues to figure out how to play quarterback in the NFL, the defense is good enough to keep them in every single game. Don't you think?
I do think that, and it's interesting that you point that out. I was in attendance on that game, and it did seem as though Vance Joseph had to overhaul what that plan was with Patrick Surtain out. The overthinking bit is so good, because we were trying to figure out what happened other than losing your best defensive player, and sort of scrambling to be able to make up that difference, because it makes the entire defensive unit have to shift and have to make up for that and have to work against that. So I'm glad you pointed that out, but it does beg the question, and I'm going to shoot it back to you for just a moment. What if Vance Joseph then has to move on with all the success that he is finding, and it's not the time frame in which the Denver Broncos can look back to run it back with Vance Joseph as a head coach, right? It's Sean Payton's team. He's going to be a big name coming up in the next couple of coaching cycles.
Yeah, I guess all you can hope for as a Broncos fan is that Vance Joseph is going to realize that he found his niche. And here's the thing, like, when he was the head coach here several years ago, he was a figurehead. He was put in place by John Elway because Elway still wanted to have predominant control. And I think everyone at this point really knew that. I mean, he didn't really have a quarterback, like a truly competent quarterback to go out there with. And so judging Vance Joseph based on his first go round as a head coach, it's a little bit unfair and insincere and short-sighted, right, to hold that against him. That being said, the Broncos have by far the richest owners in the NFL. So I think if I'm Sean Payton and if I'm the Walter Penner Group, then I'm going to Vance Joseph and I'm going to say, you know what? I know that you're going to get head coaching gigs. I understand that that's probably what you want to do. We're going to pay you like a head coach, because that doesn't come out of the salary cap. So why don't you just throw so much money at him that it's like, well, yeah, I'm not a head coach, but I'm getting paid like a head coach, and I'm going to be secure in this job for literally as long as I want. So I think that's the way that the front office needs to approach it. And at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to whether or not Vance Joseph is content only being a defensive coordinator. But that's certainly, I'm trying not to think about it because I'm trying to stay positive, but that is absolutely a thought that has crept into my head. And now the darkness is consuming me. And that's exactly why I brought you on the show. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I have to level you out at some point. But back to your original point about Bo Nix's development, I kind of alluded to it when we were talking about the schedule and how the season started off. This was a developmental year in my eyes. This was a set your expectations where they are. Don't consider the longevity of his college football career or his age, and the idea that Sean Payton was getting his guy and he was going to work to build and develop this offense the way that he saw fit. That was going to immediately guarantee a slow start. I know there's all this hopefulness that you're going to see a Stroud like rookie year, maybe a Jaden Daniels, but at this point, you have to take the idea that he's a rookie and he's going to continue to have to learn, and the playbook will get opened up and you'll be able to start seeing that really work itself out. There's not much that leads me to think that the Broncos will be, movers here at the trade deadline. I think that there's some solidification to that point as they continue to work with what they have, but there's question marks. Like there's severe target issues for Bo Nix as to who's going to take that reign as the most offensive production. You've got Cortland Sutton with 277 yards on the season. When you average that out, it's a little crazy, right? So, or receiving yards. So I think that
he didn't even have a target in New Orleans, did he?
I don't believe so.
I don't think he had a catch. I don't even know if he had a target.
You got Josh Reynolds and then Javonte Williams. My hope is that Devon Vele being back is going to change that a little bit. I think I've seen enough of the chemistry between the two of those, obviously being Bo Nix, and to hear the positive news that Troy Franklin is coming along nicely with his NFL snaps. So there's positive movement. I think as long as we continue to see that, that's the good news that you're looking for. And this is about as optimistic as you're going to get from me before I start throwing out the scaries of, that run game has to keep and continue to function. Otherwise, you're leaving this large hole and Bo is having to throw the ball far too many times. With catchable passes for your receivers, the drop balls start to kind of mitigate out, where Vele, who hasn't been playing because of an injury but has seen a substantial amount of targets, is starting to look like a favorable acquisition there for the Broncos. So in general, Bo Nix still has a ways to go, but I think it's just so weird that we're trying to win, right? The idea is that we're trying to be right about this in week 7. And I think that's where a lot of people get, I don't know, let it get the best of them, because there's the advanced analytics that are being confused so straightforwardly by Bo Nix's I guess production and the way that he's able to go out there and kind of make people scratch their heads a little bit. It makes the doubters narrative a little bit stronger. So everyone out there trying to put their thumb on Bo Nix, and he's going kind of against the grain there. So I hope that continues to build. I'm still worried about the offense and points, and until I really see it start to gel together in a way that the run game is working, the pass game is where it needs to be, and we're not solely relying on a Bo Nix run game. If you're going to design the run play for him, perfect, go ahead. It's going to work out great for him. He's super fast. We had Sean Payton admit today that he's even faster than they thought possible during
they didn't know how fast he was.
I don't know if it's did he turn it up a notch? Is NFL speed a little bit different? Does it not look the same for the eye test? It's not like they're out there clocking him. I mean, there's the analytics to support that as well, but I think by saying he's faster, I think he's just get up and go. I think it's really fun to watch him do that, but we can't constantly rely on that being a source of the rushing offense or in general the offense. So I've got question marks there, and I know that means, well, why don't we plug and play a receiver? Because you're not getting their production from whatever team they're coming from. And I think that's where I get a little bit cautious of that. We talked about it on LTB yesterday. I think the only weapon that would make me really intrigued is the Browns, David Njoku. I think that would be just entertaining and exciting, and I would throw all caution out the window and make a move there, because I think it falls into the timetable as well. You're not guessing whether or not that'll be something up front that'll work itself out. You don't want to chase big names hoping for big production, and I assume the Broncos will stay pat. But Mario, Cortland Sutton has been on the rumored trade block for what feels like 2 seasons or maybe even more, as we we wished him well in his recovery from the 2020 injury, but is that the only move you could possibly see happening?
Yeah, I saw that there were rumors about the 49ers potentially being interested. Like they showed interest in the offseason and like during the Brandon Ayuk saga. Now that Brandon Ayuk is done for the season and they've had a myriad of injuries and they have a lot of youth in that receiving core, do they reach back out to the Broncos? And I guess the question is, how does Denver feel about dealing, the guy that's perceived to be their number one wide receiver? Now, the production hasn't been there and what it needs to be for Courtland Sutton as a number one wide receiver, but we see the flashes. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, how is that going to affect Bo Nix's development if you pull a Courtland Sutton away from him? And honestly, I think you can make arguments either way. Like, maybe it forces Bo to spread the ball around more and to pick up more so on the on like the more open receiver and go through his reads quicker when he doesn't have like that definitive Courtland Sutton number one wide receiver. And on the other hand, it's like, yeah, you take away his number one wide receiver and arguably the best wide receiver on this team, and it's probably going to stun his development. And I think it would just depend on how Bo Nix responds to that. I would be shocked if Courtland Sutton gets traded just because I see them winning this next game. And, let's say that they lose to Baltimore and then they're sitting at 5-4. I just don't think that a 5-4 football team at the trade deadline is necessarily going to be a seller. And when it comes to buying, I don't think that they're going to do anything splashy. I hope that they would sign a David or trade for a David Njoku. And I think it would make a lot of sense as long as you are able to retain him. It makes sense bringing in Njoku because he's a young guy. He's exactly what this offense needs in a pass catching tight end. He can block, for the most part, better than anybody on this team at the tight end position right now. But the caveat is that you're not bringing in a guy to just be a 1-year rental, right? Whoever you bring in, you have to make sure that they're part of the future of the fabric of this team. So don't make some splash signing just because. You have to be strategic about it. I think this, like the next offseason, isn't this next one like the last year that Russell Wilson's contract is on the books, and then I think it's 2026 it's officially done for. And they have a decent amount of cap space right now, so they'll be able to make some things work. They'll be able to extend some pieces, but as long as they're not giving up too much. I saw someone in the chat earlier had asked about Cooper Kupp. From what I heard, the Rams are expecting a second round pick. And even if it was like a fourth or a fifth, I don't necessarily think that Cooper Kupp is making that big of a difference, especially in the long term. This year, would he help you win some games? If he stays healthy, yeah. Like he would come in and be the best wide receiver, assuming that he can learn the system, which, he probably would. But then what are you doing in 2025, 2026? Is it worth giving up any sort of draft pick? Like second round, way too rich for my blood. That's going to be a contender. Like that'll be a Baltimore or a Detroit or a, God forbid, Kansas City, a team like that where they think that Cooper Kupp just for this year is the missing piece. Outside of that, yeah, second round is way too much for me. And if you're going to bring in a wide receiver, again, I think it needs to be someone in their mid-20s, maybe early 20s, who can be part of this team in the future, not just a 1-year rental.
I definitely think
Bri, I want
that's
to
the
play.
way.
Sorry, go. I was just going to say segues are weird. We're going to play a little game. The name of this game, Bri, is Lit, Sit, or Quit. It had a different name, but you were offended by it, so I changed it to make it a little bit more family friendly. So the name of this game, Bri, I am going to give you the name of a player. You tell me if said player is lit, if he needs to sit, or if we must acquit. So basically, if we want to sit him, it means that he is not playing up to what he needs to be. If he's lit, we know what that means. He's lit. He's doing a great job. He's playing his part. And acquit means, yeah, he's falling a little bit short, but we're going to give him a pass for now. So the first player, we're going to start off with an easy one, a little bit of a softball. Bo Nix. Is Bo Nix been lit? Does he need to sit? Or must we acquit?
I love that you came up with the must acquit. And you're right. I was offended by the other one. I'm sure everyone at home can guess what that was.
It
Bo
was
Nix
shit.
is
But Bree didn't want to call any of the players shit. So
why? Why?
I made it a little bit nicer.
Yeah, if you don't fit, you must acquit. If you're not lit, you must acquit or sit. Bo
Cool.
Nix is lit. He's lit. He's doing his job. He's progressing. We've seen the development. I like his fire. I like the confidence. And even when he gets a little bit shaky, he shakes that off. So we're not seeing
I
whole
love that. And
games.
all the fetuses in LTB can suck it because he is lit despite what they say. Sorry. Go ahead.
I know. I think there's things worthy of criticism, and there's things where I'm like, that's concerning if it continues and doesn't really iron itself out. But to expect, like, where are you trying to? Do you think he was going to start in top 10 of quarterbacks in the league in 2024, or he was going to be infallible? I mean, even Patrick Mahomes, who is weird in all of the QB statistical categories, having probably his worst year, is still finding wins. At the end of the day, as long as Bo Nix looks serviceable, which he's fitting, Ferris Bueller, I like that. I love that he leaned into that and released that video. I thought it was A plus
This
plus,
is
and
brilliant. Yeah.
you get points for vibes here in Broncos. Me. I don't care about anyone. I mean, if everyone else wants to be, it's lame. Let's get some more touchdowns. We all want more touchdowns. Listen, I will never forget Peyton Manning, the season in which it was like 45 every game. I was like, we were going to score 45 or 60, or what was it going to be? You got bored. And so this is a little bit different, and it's going to feel as such. And I think that you almost have to temperament check yourself in where you are as in the era of Broncos country, right? So there's the era of the Peyton Manning, there's the in between era, and then there's this one that feels just a little bit different. So I think you have to put yourself into a nice little silo and look at the picture of Bo Nix's first year, Sean Payton's second. What are they doing as an offense together? The defense is lighting it up. So I think Bo Nix has some wiggle room as he continues to grow here in this league.
Next one up, Bree, and I 100% agree with you. So we're just going to move on. We're going to do this in honor of Patrick Chiotti, who as I said, is on assignment tonight. I don't know if you were familiar with Patrick Chiotti's work, but he is a very big fan of Alex Forsythe and not the biggest fan of Luke Wattenberg. Let's just say that if Luke Wattenberg were to ever see anything that Pat ever said about him, he probably wouldn't be a guest on Altitude Adjustment. So Luke Wattenberg, who is now out with injury, and we've seen 2 games now, not a big sample size. I'm sorry, like a game and some change, I guess is what it would be, of Alex Forsythe. So limited sample size, and granted, the Saints interior defensive line not scaring anybody, not keeping anyone up at night. But Luke Wattenberg, is he lit? Does he need to sit, or should we acquit?
I think I'm going to lean on the acquit side just because it's a little early to tell. But if you try to put him in a head-to-head battle, I don't think it would be fair to just be like point blank, no, this guy's got it, this guy doesn't. Now, Wattenberg was struggling. There's some plays that stick it out in my head. They may have come from Patrick Chiotti. We may have been taking them at the game. There was a little bit of concern, and seeing that. I just want to highlight, when we're talking about this, it's really important to take in the emphasis of how important your offensive line is and how important it is when you have a weak link or perceived weak link. And it's not always the one that you're finding the flaws in. It's this domino effect down the line. If the tackle on either side misses an assignment, you're pulling your guard and then your center's screwed. So I can't confidently just throw Forsythe into the lit category. I'm going to say lit to acquit, because I think by the end of this year, depending on how many snaps he gets and what that kind of looks like on the eye test alone, I think he looks good. I don't feel comfortable weighing one over the other yet, but the run game decided to catch fire with him being in place there. So I think that has to count for something. So almost like an acquit plus, I would say he's in the, purgatory of wait and see.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm putting him in sit, and that's just in honor of Patrick Keote because I know 100% that Pat would want Wattenberg sitting because Forsyth is litting. Is that the right terminology? Is that how the kids use it? Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
Moving
yeah.
on.
And I thought we were
I'm
just
trying
talking
to.
about Forsyth, so that's the direction I was going.
I'm honestly trying to think of a member of the defense to even play this game with. But Bree, honest to God, I don't think there's a single starter on the defense
Uh-huh.
that's not lit right now. I mean, like I'm trying to give something, but it's like every single member of that defense is doing what they need to be doing. Everyone is playing their role. Zach Allen is having, honest to God, a defensive
Yeah.
player of the year caliber season, and he's
Mhm.
not going to get the love he deserves because he's not necessarily a household name, and he's not a complete game wrecker the way that Aaron Donald was at the defensive tackle position. But Zach Allen has been so integral in this defense. The addition of John Franklin Myers has been fantastic. Nick Benito, 5 games in a row with a sack. You know what you're getting out of Jonathan Cooper. He's been fantastic. Jonah Ellis has played great football. You know, Baron Browning working back from injury, but he was pressuring the quarterback all night. He never quite got home, but he's giving you what you want to see, especially like first game back from an injury. Cody Barton had the game of his life. He should have been the defensive player of the week, if we're being completely honest. We know about Surtain. Riley Moss is making all of us white people proud. And the group that I was most concerned with, Bree, was the safeties. Like, how do you make up for the loss of Justin Simmons? Now, would this defense be better with Justin Simmons? 100%. Absolutely. But Brandon Jones has held his own, and he's been a very good safety. And PJ Locke has really stepped up. And PJ was one of the people I wasn't necessarily worried about, but I was interested to see how PJ would play because when you're playing with Justin Simmons as a safety, as a defensive back in general, it makes your life much easier. You
Mhm.
switched from that to Brandon Jones. PJ Locke has really stepped up and made a name for himself and proven that he's a standalone guy. So just ran through pretty much all the defensive players. Unless you can think of someone that's not lit, I think that we can just stick on the offensive side of the ball.
I think you do have to do that. You obviously can't run down the entire roster. You're not Russell Wilson here, but JFM needs his flowers. Coop is
I
so
a little bit of a Russell Wilson there. Let me list all the guys that I know.
he's great there. He does his job. He works really hard. I didn't mean to give Russell Wilson a Southern accent, but that's just how my voice came out at that point. PJ Locke is
It
going
works. It works.
going through his transitional period this season where he's having to fill the big shoes while still doing a fantastic job at what he does. I mean, the Broncos have had to throw, I think at even one point I thought I saw Tanner McAllister out there and he was having to do his job. So
Yeah.
just want to point out I'm really like every single time I see Coop try to come around that edge and he gets held, I am just livid. I am beside myself because he should have more sacks. He should be
Yeah.
getting home more often. And then I was going somewhere else with that point and I really wanted to touch on it and it might be gone. Oh, yeah, Barton. So, absolutely stellar performance, which made up for so much shit talking from Broncos country, where they were like, "Oh, me too." I was like, so many of those misses were on Barton, and it just clicked over for him. So I'm excited to see that JL Skinner doing great on special teams, which I just wanted to throw that out as well. But you're right. I don't think there's literally anyone. It would have to be such a weird sideways. I don't know, salt burn for me to be able to throw something out there towards anyone on the defense. So give me the offense. I'm ready for a challenge.
All right. So someone that we talked about already, Cortland Sutton. Has Cortland Sutton been lit? Does he need to sit, or must we acquit?
I don't think you can actually sit a Cortland Sutton. When you talked about the tie-in with Bo Nix's development with Cortland Sutton being your wide receiver one, being the best wide receiver out there, but there's something that's missing. And I don't know if that'll come later on in the season, but it has to come quick. Cortland Sutton may not be a Denver Bronco, for much longer. I don't think you can sit him. I think you have to acquit him on account of it just doesn't fit right now. And that's because the offense in itself is stagnant. It's not even boring. It's one dimensional right now, but you can see them trying to move away from that. And I think Cortland Sutton being your safety net is amazing because he can reel in those catches and those touchdowns, where you're almost confused how he was able to get both of his feet in because it looked like he was levitating. So I would say lit. I would even say Cortland Sutton is legit. I think what this is a emphasis on for his, non-production is trying to figure out what Bo Nix needs to do in order to build that chemistry there. And that just might not happen within a season's time. And it's unfortunate. That Russell Wilson and Cortland Sutton was going to be there and bailing out Russell Wilson when he had the opportunity to do so. You're just not seeing that here with Bo. You're seeing Bo needing to make decisions, and maybe the decisions aren't always necessarily in the best predicament for a Cortland Sutton. So I think wherever we need to put that there, I think Court is doing what he needs to do. I know there's some question marks about whether or not I don't know. I've seen people even say that there's a want problem there, or like he's not giving it his all. I don't think a Cortland Sutton can afford to do that. So I'm going to call BS on that one. I don't think he's phoning it in necessarily. I think that there's
that seems a bit short-sighted to say.
Yeah, there's some growing pains. I think it's just really easy, right? The whole diva wide receiver conversation that everyone brings up every season of who's causing issues now and why are they a wide receiver? They're not. That's their job is to be loud. So they, one, get recognized, two, are able to pick up a contract because wide receivers don't stay for their forever careers on one team. It's a busy business, and the NFL is a business. And I just don't think Cortland Sutton would tank his stock by acting like he's not really in it to win it. So weird conversations to be having here, but yeah, I think that it can step up. I'd be interesting to see though who Bo Nix starts favoring, because I don't think it's going to be Sutton, and I just think it's because the younger guys are doing a really great job of stepping up. Also, little Jordan Humphrey has been super respectable. And so I said it last season. He's inevitable. You should have just bought your 17 jersey, but then all of us would have been SOL because we would have had to change numbers. So there's that for you. Court's a big question mark, and I think you have to lean in a little bit into what your personal biases are when you make that call.
Atomic 626 here brings up a really good point. Sutton's good at 50-50 balls. Absolutely. You throw a 50-50 ball to him, it's more like 60-40, 70-30. But it leaves so little room of error for a rookie. And this is something that I wanted to touch on, and maybe why Bo and Court haven't necessarily gotten that connection going. Arguably, the only thing that Russell Wilson was really consistently good at in his short time in Denver, was trusting Cortland Sutton, just throwing him up the ball and trusting that Cortland was going to come down with the catch. And we've seen Russell Wilson do it because he did the same thing with George Pickens the other night with Pittsburgh. It's like it's everything at or around the line of scrimmage, and then the occasional just deep ball, like let his 50-50 receiver go and make a catch. And so I think it is completely feasible and plausible that Bo Nix doesn't have that level of comfortability as a rookie, where it's like sometimes you're so concerned with not turning the ball over and protecting the ball that you're not going to take the matchup, even though it could be favorable. So maybe that's something that we see continue to develop. And harkening back to what we're talking about earlier, Cortland Sutton staying on this team like this year and then next year and any years past, the more time that they spend together, I think the more comfortable that Bo is going to get throwing those 50-50 type of balls. And typically it's the more seasoned veteran quarterbacks we see making those kind of plays who trust their wide receivers. So as long as they build that trust, then I think that can be a relationship that forms. And then Atomic 626 said, I think it's going to be Troy. And I think the way that it's trending, the fact that Troy Franklin was in Oregon with Bo Nix, they already have that connection. That gets back to the connection that I'm talking about. There's that trust between quarterback and receiver. And as a 7-time intramural flag football champion, Bri, I can tell you that familiarity with your wide receivers is everything to a quarterback. And that's how you win 7 intramural flag football championships.
It's
On to
got
the
to be
next.
it's got to be really hard for you because your current flag football predicament is everyone's out via injury and old age. So you've got no favorability or chemistry with your receivers as they continue to drop like flies.
It
But
also doesn't help that everyone is in their mid 30s versus being in their early 20s when we very first started all of this. We're on the same page. Everything's just a lot slower now. Getting on to the next one. And I've been pretty vocal about how I've felt about his play. He redeemed himself against New Orleans, but granted, it seemed to be one of those typical Chase Young off games. And that's been the biggest knock on Chase Young, right? I don't think anyone has ever questioned his ability and his talent. And for the most part, he's had a really good season. But the film has shown us time and time and time again that the dude just chooses to not have a motor and take plays off. So I'm, of course, talking about Garrett Bolles. If you put in any stock in PFF, and typically the guys that I stock in PFF, ironically, are the ones that get the good grades, he redeemed himself in PFF's eyes. Now, I saw a couple plays, like the two big run plays that really stood out to me where you see it and you're like, man, that was a fantastic block by Garrett. You slow it down, and one of them he was pulling up the middle, and it was a big run, I think, for McLaughlin, but I could be wrong. And he's supposed to seal the edge, and he didn't actually touch it. It was perfect timing because the running back was able to get past the defender, but it's like, well, he's in the right position. He didn't touch him. And then the other play was the design run by Bo Nix, where they got Garrett out in space, which I think that they need to do more of. He's a very athletic tackle and moves really well for his size. But then when you slow it down, it's like, okay, well, he kind of got in the way, but he was out there and then didn't actually touch the guy. But maybe the fact that just his body was in the general position that it needed to be, it was just enough to like freak the defender out. Like, the defender had a little mini stroke. It was like, oh God, what just happened? That being said, the two best highlights of Bo Nix that we've seen have been compliment of Garrett Bolles getting beat off the snap, and Bo inexplicably showing that he has eyes in the back of his head, dodging a sack when it looks like he's going to get his head taken off, and then proceeds to scramble for 20 plus yards. So, has Garrett been as good at any point as he was in 2020? No. 2021, he was very solid. He was still good, not quite that 2020 level. 2022 had the injury. Last year, not bad, but like maybe we're chalking that more up to the fact that Russell Wilson ran himself into so many sacks. To me, with a rookie quarterback who's going through growing pains and kind of figuring out his progressions, with as much money as Garrett is making and the value that he should carry for this team, he has not been good enough. So I'll ask you, with Garrett Bolles, has he been lit? Does he need to sit? Or do we acquit?
All right, this one's a hard one, and I want to touch on a couple of things too. And I had to look something up because I was very concerned, and I still don't think I have the correct. It's like in these moments, I want to be able to text Zach Seegers just to get this little piece of data set. But Bo Nix,
this isn't a nerd show, Bri. We don't do numbers and advanced analytics and get out our protractors and our pocket protectors. Okay, we just talk ball.
Yo, the line
leave the nerd shit at the door with the nerds.
We follow physics on the line, and also time to throw is a very important decision-making tool for your line as well, because if Garrett Bolles is doing his best, I can't sit him because what are you going to do? Quinn Bailey's hurt.
His best.
Quinn Bailey might not.
Best?
Yes, but the offensive line and tackle in specific and guard are difficult positions to play. Like, what are you anticipating and who are you replacing him with if you're just like, oh, Garrett Bolles isn't cutting it anymore? Now, listen, I have opinions, but I'm not going to sit Garrett Bolles in anticipation for Matt Parrott. Like, that's not what's happening. And Quinn Bailey may never play again because he's on the IR because he snapped his leg in half. And so Garrett Bolles has had what I would say is an issue, and I don't know if it's a Ben Powers combination issue, what I would give to be a fly on the wall so I could hear the film room as they're breaking this down, because I don't quite understand what the misfire is here. Bowles and tackles in general are going to get those holding calls because they've got the edge ripping off past them. There may be some times in which he flashes his next move a little too often. I think you can ultimately tell from where Garrett Bolles' feet are if it's going to be a run or a pass. That's an issue, right? But if I'm sitting him, who am I putting out there? You talked about it. The athleticism is there. He's been a long time here on this line. He is a veteran piece of it. And it's a contract year for Garrett Bolles. There's an important decision coming down the pike on whether or not they're going to draft and develop and stick them behind Garrett Bolles, or if they're going to have to plug and play a new offensive line member. So you've done that with Powers and McGlinchey. You've got the strong force that is Quinn Miners, who also was struggling a bit to start this year. And that, I don't think that's a Zach Strief issue. I don't think that's a Garrett Bolles issue. I just wonder if there is some gelling that needs to continue to happen. I think you can say that maybe he's not doing his job to the utmost in which is possible, but we're not going to, you already said it to start, but we're not going to see the 2020-2021 season Garrett Bolles again. And I think maybe that injury has something to do with it, but also I don't know if the line is 1,000% the most comfortable thing that we have going on here with the Denver Broncos right now. And I still think they're trying to figure each other out. And when you have the injuries that you have, and when you have to start all over again with your anchor there at center, things are going to happen. I don't think enough love gets shed on the line to then be able to throw so much hate at them when it's not looking like you can't just, it's an incredibly hard positional unit because there's so much that is in the responsibility of each one of those members. And I just want to say, before you start saying this guy's a bum, maybe understand that the only reason the quarterback's standing in general is because that line is holding their own. So I also want to compliment in that same vein, Bo Nix's ability to negate negative plays, right? But I think he does it too much. Like maybe at one point you do have to not hold the ball so long and chuck it downfield and throw an interception. And it's not going to be the end of the world. But right now he's looking pretty clean. And I think you have the line to kind of complement that a little bit as well. Because Bo's mobile, but he kind of moves in a direction where I'm like, that could have been a sack. And it should have been a holding call. So I don't know where to rank that one. And I'm going to say a quit, I think, is the middle one, right? Like, I think you got to quit him. I think you need to give him his ups for what he's continued to do as a Denver Bronco. Maybe you do want to see a little bit more out of him, but it's not like he's not facing foes in which you're like, that guy blew him out. So, but questionable, very questionable. Garrett Bolles, he really lets you know where he's going with that ball and with his body. And I think he's aged out. I think the Broncos will most likely have to re-sign him. Again, tackle's not a position that you just want to go swimming in open water and grab the first one you see. And no discredit to Matt Parrott. I think he's coming along nicely. I just don't think he's ready to take over that starting position.
Will you do me a favor? So I see you repping the 6-0 strength sticker in the background. Shout out Matt McChesney. He's a fucking legend. I want you to channel Matt, if you will. Yes, we all love Matt. Just real quick, Bri, we're just going to do a fun little exercise. You know, you and I oftentimes imitate him in the most endearing way possible. So I want you to channel Matt and tell me what Matt might think about one Garrett Bolles.
I don't know if I can channel him appropriately, and now I'm wildly uncomfortable.
Are you worried that this is a family-friendly program?
Yeah, I mean, there's some choice words that could be had, and there's like, I don't know, GB zone. That's all I have for on that. Is I'm wildly uncomfortable by you making me uncomfortable, and I didn't have my sunglasses ready.
You know that I had to make you comfortable at some point. I gave you a whole rundown of the show. So at some point, I had to make you just moderately uncomfortable. It's okay. I was just messing with you. You're off the hook. Before we move on, And if you have, if you're in the chat and if you're curious about a player and you want to know if we think that they're lit, sit, or quit, Bri, is there anybody in particular on the offensive side of the ball that you would like to discuss specifically?
On the offense, again, that's like something that you caught me off guard on, but I'm willing to have the conversation. The running backs in general, Javonte Williams and Audric Estime, do we have a fumbling problem? Is there?
Why don't we stay with Javonte? Like Jalil's, kind of the gadget guy. He's the burst guy. I think what you're going to get out of him. I don't think he fits into this category because it's like he's not getting a lot of touches a game. He's not getting the Javonte volume. And you're right, like Estime, clearly a fumbling problem. Something needs to happen there. But again, I feel like if you're getting fewer than 10 touches per game, then you're exempt from this list for now. So why don't we focus on Javonte? And I'll preface it by saying early on in the season, you're excited because you're like, all right, Javonte clearly came back too soon last year. He should have started on IR. You could tell he wasn't running. He wasn't running hard. His vision seemed like it had regressed. He wasn't finishing runs the way that we had seen his rookie year. He didn't have that burst. He didn't have that wow factor that endeared all of us to him his rookie season. And then coming into this year, you're like, all right, he's had an entire another offseason to train. And this is something that I've discussed with Pat ad nauseum and something that I always want to preach. It is so different for an athlete during the offseason if you can train as opposed to rehab. When you are rehabbing an injury and you're working back to 100%, that is a completely different regimen than if you are training to play a specific football position. So the year before, Javonte is rehabbing. And he probably should have extended his rehab into the season. But again, water under the bridge. This year, in this offseason, he was able to train the right way. And so you're thinking going into the season that we're going to see the Javonte Volt. He starts off slow. It seemed like things started to click against New York. He was a huge reason why they were able to win that game. And kind of regressed a little bit again against the Chargers and then blew up against New Orleans, which in that situation is exactly what you want because New Orleans has an absolutely dreadful run defense. We know about all the injuries. That's the get right game. And now you have another one against Carolina. So I think this can be a defining game. Someone had said in the chat earlier they want to see Bo Nix throw for over 300 yards against the Panthers. At first, I saw that and I was like, man, that would be really nice. But the more I thought about it, you are not going to win games having Bo throw for 300 yards a game. You will win games having Javonte Williams rush for 100 yards or accumulate 100+ all-purpose yards and throw in a touchdown. So to me, that's almost more important in the scope of this offense and the identity of this offense is that Javonte needs to have back-to-back get-right games where you are feeding him and we are seeing old Javonte because if there are two teams in the league against whom you can do this, it was the Saints and now it's the Panthers. Feed Javonte 30 times a game. Let him get over 100 yards. Give him over 30 touches. This needs to be the Javonte game. Because when you go to Baltimore and then you go to Kansas City, you are not going to say, hey, we're going to win this game with Bo Nix throwing for over 300 yards. That's just not the recipe to beat those teams. You have to run the ball and you have to keep their offenses off the field. So I think this game needs to be the Javonte Williams get-right game part 2 before we hit this gauntlet of at Baltimore and at Kansas City. So as it stands right now, and obviously he's coming off a fantastic game with Javonte, is he lit? Has he broken into that echelon for you? Do we acquit for now, or does he need to sit?
I think you have to, and I was taking an idea that it was lit based on he's doing what he's being asked to do. And if you're the third leading receiver and obviously the leading rusher, but just barely over Bo Nix, I think you're doing your job appropriately, but we can put him in the acquit category. This Carolina Panthers run defense, allowing the most yards in the NFL, I think is going to be a true testament if you can take advantage of that, if you can really throw this entire offense off balance, but rebalance it in the same way where he's able to have those games where, 100 all-purpose yards, how about 100 rushing? And let's see him really turn that on and hold on to the ball. Turnovers are a death sentence, especially for running backs in Colorado. It is the make or break point there. And
I'm
so
Melvin Gordon.
shout out. I think that it's really important that starts to become or not, or if you can hear me. Can you hear me? We good?
Sorry,
Okay.
yeah, it cut out for a second. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, no, all good. I was just saying that you'd want to see this progression here. The character arc from Javonte Williams, injury season to coming back and not really having that rehabilitation portion that you spoke about in the offseason, having to come in and everyone's like, where's the Javonte of old? This is the season in which he's able to develop not only the vision, which was a sour point in his skill set, but you can also give him the ball and it not have to be rushing. He's been tremendous there for Bo Nix in those isolated passes, in which gets them the yardage that they need. Whatever propels the ball down the field is going to be exactly what I think needs to happen. So I'm not mad at it. I'm going to say lit for Javonte Williams with a little side of a quit because we still need to see what this season ends up looking like. And there's not enough yards of offense happening for the Denver Broncos. There's not enough time of possession, which the only way that you get more of that is running the ball. And so if it is squarely on Javonte's shoulders because you've got Estime being, like you said, a quick burst, you're throwing Beatty out there and McLaughlin just for shits and giggles, then I think there needs to be an actual plan for Javonte Williams. And this year is going to be telltale. You need to know what you have. There was the conversation in the offseason of whether or not Javonte Williams would be a long-term participant on this Denver Broncos team. And I think that this is the proving point as we approach the midseason of whether or not this is the running back of the future or if they have to go in a new direction, which I know the conversation has already heated up on tight end, but the conversation should be heating up on running back as well. You need that multiple committee run by committee, and it's not just a lead back situation anymore. So the Broncos will be looking to bolster that room in general, and Estime is a great step in that direction. But why not 3? And Javonte can be a part of that, I think, as long as those kinks get worked out. But this whole offense is a little janky, and I'm just going to reiterate it. It's not in sync. It's not working to the best of its ability. There's an oil change that needs to happen. And it's not coming from additional roster talent. It's coming from time to really assess what the best game plan is moving forward to initiate success for Bo Nix and for his counter pieces. Who is the piece for Bo Nix? We're not looking for a spark plug. We're looking for an entire roster set around him. And we may have the pieces in place now, or we may be looking to add those next offseason, because this year, whatever they finish, and if it's 10 wins, that is a pleasant surprise that I wasn't anticipating.
I want to touch on that, and that's a great segue. But really quick, Atomic wants to know about Mims. I'm just going to keep this short and sweet. And this is nothing against Mims, but I think he needs to sit right now. It just doesn't feel like there's a place for him on this team, and he strikes me as a guy that like probably needs a change of scenery. And this whole situation has been so strange to me because we were told that he got limited reps. It's like he looked really good last year in the limited reps that he got, to the point where week in and week out, people were questioning Sean Payton, saying, why isn't Mims getting more touches? Why isn't Mims getting more touches? And his response basically was, well, Jerry Jeudy played the same position that he was playing. Jerry Jeudy was the starter. That's just kind of how it worked out. So then here we are all assuming that coming into the season with Jerry Jeudy gone to Cleveland, that Mims would step into that role, and he's been basically non-existent on this offense. And it also doesn't help that you drafted Troy Franklin, who, for all intents and purposes, is basically a Marvin Mims type of player. It's like you're a straight line guy. It's like your route tree needs a little bit of refinement, but the difference between Franklin and Mims is Franklin and Nix have that familiarity with one another, and we're seeing that continue to develop and grow week in and week out. And as Troy Franklin continues to develop, I think that we're going to see less and less of Marvin Mims. And so, through no fault of his own, I think Mims needs to sit.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think you knocked it out of the park there. I don't know what the issue is. I also don't know what the issue is with Greg Dulcich. Being a healthy scratch is it's a choice, and I think that those are choices
Well, it's
that we're
because
going to
Lucas
see.
Kroll is the best player on the team, as was noted by a very well-respected person at the Fan. And he definitely wasn't laughed out of the room when he made those comments, because Lucas Kroll's definitely the best player on the team.
I mean, there's that too.
Let's wrap this up and put a nice bow on it. You had said that if the team wins 10 games, that you would be pleasantly surprised, right? So I'm going to pull up the remaining schedule, and let's just for the sake of argument assume that they beat the Panthers and then they lose in Baltimore and lose in Kansas City, which I think is how most people realistically would see this going. So 10 games into the season, you're at 5-5. And honestly, if you had told me that going into the season, this team would be 5-5, 10 games into the season before their matchup with Atlanta, I'd be psyched. Be like, we're at 500. They had a brutal start to the season. Like we've said multiple times, this 2-game stretch coming up after Carolina is absolutely brutal. So we're standing there, and I'm just going to list it so you can kind of materialize it here, Bree. They have Atlanta at home, who's a bit of a schizophrenic team. One week they'll look fantastic and like a contender, and the next week they'll completely fall flat. At Las Vegas, who is having all sorts of problems, against Cleveland, who might be the only team having more issues than the Las Vegas Raiders. The bye week, home against Indianapolis, and then they finish their season at the Chargers, at Cincinnati, and versus Kansas City. So with those 7 final games, let's say that you need to win 5 of them in order to obtain that 10-win season. And that probably gets you into the playoffs. Probably. It doesn't help that Pittsburgh has the tiebreaker. You're going to have to win some division games and hope that Pittsburgh drops some division games. But really, outside of the big 3 in the AFC, and I would say it's the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Texans right now as it stands, I'm not terrified of a lot of these AFC teams. Like they're just really not world beaters. I thought the Colts would be
No.
better, and Richardson is looking rough. Cincinnati always starts slow, but it's just like there's something is weird there too. Like Cincinnati is not the Cincinnati that we've seen the last couple of years. So it's like that game doesn't necessarily scare me, even though it's in Cincinnati at the end of the year. I think that this team with 10 wins can sneak into the playoffs as the 7th seed in the wild card. So of those remaining games, after we've reached that 10, we're sitting at 5-5 in our hypothetical. Can this team win 5 of those last 7 games, Bree? And what needs to happen in order for them to do it?
Oh, Lord. Mario, what's going to happen against Indianapolis is we're going to end up having to face Joe Flacco, and it's going to be this convergence of all the worldly karma that I've tried to avoid.
Joe
Season
Flacco comes
after
in here
season.
and beats us. I'm going to burn someone's house down.
I'm going to burn myself down is what's going to happen.
Burn the house down that you're in. We'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Exactly. I was counting. So Falcons, I don't trust them to not be a complete, not even trap game, right? It's going to be Kirk Cousins makes you feel bad for doubting Kirk Cousins, who I love. And I think that they will probably drop that one unless, again, the karma swing. We've seen all of the teams the Broncos have been anticipatorily awaiting to play just befall themselves of all this crazy dysfunction. So maybe the Falcons have something up their sleeve where we're going to see some sort of bust or unhappy player. And I don't know. I don't think Kirk Cousins is Aaron Rodgers, so I don't think you have to worry about the corruption being from the quarterback's hands. But I'm going to go a loss with the Falcons. I'm going to go win with the Raiders because the Raiders are in just poor spirits. And even though it's going to be in Las Vegas, I mean, what is that? Tourism Central? I mean, it's not all Vegas fans out there. It'll be a home game for the Denver Broncos. Broncos fans travel well. They're going to beat the Browns. I hope they beat the Colts. So that's 1, 2. That's so rich though. 1, 2, 3. They have to beat the Chargers then, and then they have to beat Cincinnati, which would allow for the clean sweep with the Kansas City Chiefs, which I think still happens with Mahomes playing as badly as he is, because we don't have Justin Simmons on the defense, and he's not going to be intercepting Mahomes. We're going to have to hope that Brandon Jones has it in his back pocket, that he's taken that over now, since that's probably the saddest part of the Justin Simmons departure, is that I have to keep recalling it as we continue to face the Chiefs and his upstanding record. So I think they drop both games against the Chiefs, and that last half of the swing could, Falcons.
Can I tell you why I think they win that Week 18 game against the Chiefs?
Well,
2 reasons.
If they've already solidified the AFC West, why are they playing everybody? It's a great point to have Kansas City out there.
I mean, honestly, and they'll drop games. Like, their offense is playing too poorly for them to go undefeated. Like, they'll drop some, but they're in the driver's seat, right? I think that they'll have whatever spot that they end up with will be locked up, right? And they're like, I think what Broncos fans have to hope for is like they lock up the 2 seed. So they're not getting that first round bye. You have to hope that that's, maybe Baltimore ends up with that number 1 seed. So the Chiefs' approach would be like, okay, we don't get the bye week, so we're going to sit our guys. We're locked into this spot. And, if Denver makes it into the playoffs based on that win, because that's going to be a massive game one way or another. Like, as long as the team continues to look the way that they are, we want this to be relevant. We want December to be relevant football in Denver. End of December, right? And so ending the season against the Chiefs, it would theoretically give you a division win. And most importantly, Bri, that is the other game in which they are wearing the perfect throwbacks. And I just have such a hard time believing that a team that looks that good on the field could ever conceptually lose a football game. As it stands now, it's like I'm still riding high off of the New Orleans win. I know that they were decimated by injuries, and they were a far cry from the 2-0 team they were after the first 2 weeks of the season. But I'm going to continue to believe. And again, and we're going to end the show on this, when your defense is playing as well as the Denver Broncos defense is, as long as you can continue that, and as long as you can continue getting that brilliance out of Vance Joseph, you can compete with anybody. This Broncos team matches up very well with this Chiefs team. And this is why it's important for Javonte Williams to get going. That's how you're going to win that game. As long as the defense continues to hold up their end of the bargain, and you hold the Chiefs to 13, like preferably under 20 points, conceivably that's a winnable game. Like, they're not world beaters like we've seen. They match up really well with that team. And that extends to pretty much every team that they're going to play. If the defense shows up and keeps them in the game, then they have the potential to beat any team. But at some point, as you had pointed out earlier, the offense has to start clicking. Bo Nix has to play all 4 quarters of a game, because it's something that we haven't seen yet. He's had games where he's had 1 really good quarter, like he did against the Chargers, where he's had 2 really good quarters, like he did against Tampa Bay and the Raiders, and you could argue the Saints. We have not seen a full 4-quarter solid game from Bo Nix. And if and when we ever see that, Bri, it is going to be fantastic, because that will be peak 2024 Broncos, where you get 4 quarters out of Bo Nix and a defense playing the way that they are.
Yeah, it's something to get excited about. And listen, I love the rationale there. I can't do it. The Chiefs have their refs on their side. They have Mahomes pulling a fast one on everybody. I don't know. And if it does happen, I'm going to be excited about it. And I'll probably miss it like I missed the last one. So maybe that's good luck for everybody involved.
Bri, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I asked you earlier today, and you're such a superstar. Easily my favorite person over at Let's Talk Broncos, even though that's a pretty low bar outside of you, Carter, and Patrick. Any closing arguments or anything you need to get off your chest before we get out of here?
No, I just thank you for having me on. And I knew you were going to try to make me uncomfortable, and you did it in the sweetest way possible by including Matt. So thanks for not making me too wildly weirded out by that. But yeah, it's always a great time. I want to be on more often. And if you got a podcast out there and you want one of our LTB contributors to be on, send the DMs over, not to me, but to the LTB podcast. Let's get this show rolling, man. We have so many great shows, great contributors, and if it's me, then so be it. But go follow us, go subscribe, make sure you set your notifications, and tune in tomorrow as we have a Panthers preview on Let's Talk Broncos. And then football is never ending for me. So as much as I enjoy the off season, I'm glad that there's important football being played right now for the Denver Broncos, the Colorado Buffaloes, and the Mountain Vista Eagles. So thanks for having me on, and being able to do this with you is the best, because you are the best.
You are the best, and I don't say it nearly enough. Please tell Matt that I would very much like to cuddle him. My name's Mario Batanzi. That is the incomparable, haunting Bri Maestas, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. Love you. Bye-bye.
Hey, feel I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose till I hiccup. I hit the stage and leave with money that's a stick.